Welcome, good afternoon. I would like to start the meeting. This meeting is being recorded, so if you agree to be recorded, then please click so that you stay involved. This is an important and interesting seminar early in the new year, to which I warmly welcome Ndidi Nwuneli. Ndidi is not only managing partner of Sahel Consulting Agriculture and Nutrition and a co-founder of AACE Foods and a founder of Leap Africa, which inspires and empowers new leaders in the field of food and agriculture and beyond. So she is not only an inspiring businesswoman, but Ndidi, I hope you don't mind if I also say that deep down you are an academic. Ndidi publishes, engages intellectually as a board member, for instance, in the board of trustees of Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, and the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, where I have had the pleasure to see you engage as a combined intellectual and with business sense. And that's what food and agriculture in Africa certainly benefits from. Today's seminar will draw on an upcoming book on food entrepreneurs in Africa, scaling resilient agriculture businesses. That's how it's called. And we really look forward to see the book when it's out. And we appreciate that you give us a sneak preview to the book. Ndidi, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Professor Joachim, for those kind words. And thank you to all of you for sparing the time in your very busy schedules to engage. I know there's so many demands on all of our time. And the fact that you've made this a priority means a lot. I, as Professor Joachim has said, really I'm an aspiring academic. I don't know if I'm there yet. And I admire academics. I come from an academic family. Both of my parents are professors, and my husband's parents were also professors. So I never thought I'd be an aspiring academic, but here I am. So I'm going to basically spend about 30 minutes walking you through this presentation. I hope you can all see it clearly and hear me clearly as well.
Very clearly, so, very good.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start off with this picture on the right. And this is the picture that actually drew me into agriculture and the food ecosystem. This picture followed me around the world when I moved to the US at 16 to start my educational experience. People would tell me, you know, there are starving children in Africa. My parents used to say, finish your dinner. Oh, you're from Nigeria. There was a Biafran war and starving children in Biafra. And this was the face of Africa, a hungry child. And this made me angry and it made me sad because I didn't recognize this face from my childhood in Enugu, Nigeria. So I started a range of companies, Sahel Consulting, which works across Africa, transforming the agriculture and nutrition landscape. Our vision is to be recognized as the most trusted consulting partner, and our mission is really to involve ourselves in ecosystem solutions that drive catalytic change. I'm also the co-founder of a food processing company, which sources locally and processes for the local market with a focus on displacing imports and also fighting malnutrition. Because when we started this company, we recognized that we're still net importers of food in our country, and yet 60% of our population works in agriculture. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be net exporters of food. So this propelled us to start companies to actually demonstrate what was possible. And through my work as an entrepreneur myself, and through engaging with entrepreneurs through Leap Africa, which Professor Joachim mentioned, and which works in 6 African countries and is about 19 years old now, through ACE, through Sahel, really realized that so many entrepreneurs were struggling to start and scale businesses in the food and agriculture landscape. They struggled with lack of funding, poor linkages to markets, weak brands, difficulty finding talent, poor support networks, an unfavorable policy environment, limited access to data, and inefficient business models. And so I decided to spend some time studying this, and I actually spent a year at the Harvard Kennedy School as a fellow, really working on the research to inform what it will take for food entrepreneurs in the African continent to scale. And I'll share with you some insights from my research. So the first major insight is that while so many of us know about food companies in Africa and know about the opportunities on the continent, we really haven't delved into what it will take to scale. We know that Africa currently has 1.3 billion people, and it's predicted to double to 2.5 billion by 2050. And all of these people need to be fed. In fact, I have done a little calculation that says if each of these 2.5 billion people just spends $1 a day on food, I mean, that's a humongous market. Akinwumi Adesina estimates that this is a $3 trillion industry. And that's at the very minimum. If we spend up to $10 a day on food, it multiplies exponentially. But there are some critical realities that we are facing on the continent. Climate change is a critical reality with increasing levels of drought and flooding, even in cities and rural communities, high rates of post-harvest losses, high rates of malnutrition, and you know all of these statistics, infrastructure, talent, and financing gaps, poor regulatory environment, gender inequity with a serious gender gap when it comes to food and agriculture, and some interesting global and regional trade dynamics, with Africa still being considered a net exporter of commodities and a net importer of processed products. But there are some promising trends, and that's what my book focuses on, what it will take for us to leverage these promising trends to leapfrog. A key promising trend is digitization. We know that there's so many innovations, and CTA recently did a study that actually estimated about 400 different possible innovations for the food and agricultural landscape, both technology innovations, innovations around seed systems, and soil protection, and soil health, and processing, and storage, and logistics. There are also tremendous potential around youth engagement. 70% of Africa's population is young, and so many young people are interested in agriculture, not with the hoe and cutlass in the farm setting, but actually leveraging digital and innovation to make agriculture more attractive to our young people. There's a growing middle class on the African continent, an increase in interest in healthy diets, and a focus on equity. And when I say focus on equity, you know, last year, more than ever before, we recognized that the Black Lives Matter movement was not unique to the United States, but actually even on the African continent, there was a need to really look at issues around equity and financing in particular. And so my book, which is called Food Entrepreneurs in Africa, which is being published by Routledge and will be out in March, focuses on what it will take for us to capitalize on these promising trends. And the biggest takeaway for me was the importance of business models that are scalable and that are dynamic. Many entrepreneurs fail because they have flawed business models. In fact, in the agriculture sector, like many sectors, entrepreneurs enter with a passion or a desire to solve a problem, or out of necessity because they couldn't get a job. And what we realize is that so many of our business models are flawed. And so the book focuses on 6 prerequisites for successful business models that scale. The first is that the interventions have to be demand-driven with measurable value addition. Now, this might seem like a no-brainer, but not on the African continent, because there's so many distortions caused by donor interventions, caused by government interventions, and you have so many businesses that are actually supply-driven and not demand-driven. And when they try to scale, they realize that their business models are too expensive or too inefficient, or actually don't meet the needs of the consumers. We've seen this with orange flesh sweet potato, which on face value sounds fantastic because it feeds the gap when it comes to vitamin A deficiency. And lots of money has gone into funding the scale up of orange sweet potato interventions. I'm sure that Professor Joachim knows about a lot of these interventions, but when you dig a bit deeper, In our country, Nigeria, there's been a resistance to adoption of orange fresh sweet potato because it's difficult to cook. People are not used to it. They're used to white sweet potato. The same applies to soybean. Soybean is so nutritious, and yet we wonder, why don't the average consumers actually adopt soybean as part of their regular diet? And you realize that if it's not pre-processed, soybean is extremely expensive and difficult to cook. I tried it one day in my house, and it took 5 hours to cook the soybeans before it was ground. And I wondered how a woman who was dependent on firewood or kerosene would devote 5 hours to making soybean soft enough for her to use as a bean. But if it's roasted and crushed into flour, it's so much easier. So we don't often think about the logistics and the convenience and the cost effectiveness of our interventions. And that's why this concept of demand-driven models, where consumers are willing to pay, whether they are farmers or processors or families, and they value it. The second is leveraging technology, data, and innovation. The business models that are scaling on the African continent leverage this. I interviewed over 80 entrepreneurs across the continent for my research and realized that so many of them that were able to scale understood how to leverage data, understood how to interpret data and utilize data to shift, to respond, and to adapt. They also leverage technology, not just basic technology, but they looked at how technology could increase the efficiency and effectiveness of their business. The third is shaping ecosystem, and I'll talk about this in greater detail. Entrepreneurs that have scaled on the African continent understand they have to shape policy. They're not patient bystanders. They get involved in actually shaping the policy that affects their businesses. And COVID-19 showed us how urgent and important it is for entrepreneurs to be involved in shaping policy. And this is a no-brainer for big companies. Every large multinational has a whole department focused on policy and advocacy. They don't call it that, but we know corporate affairs is about policy and advocacy. But most SMEs don't realize how critical this is to their sustainability and their success. Fourth, these business models are cost efficient. They have systems and structures that make them dynamic and able to scale. Fifth, businesses that scale on the African continent have very simple, compelling branding. They know how to tell their stories. They know how to amplify their voice. And finally, but last not least, they adapt to climate change. They've built in resilience into their DNA, and they've learned how to mitigate shocks and adapt. And I'll take you through these in more detail. When I looked at business models that were emerging on the continent, that were scaling, that were exciting, that were raising money, two jumped out. One is called Cow Tribe. Cow Tribe is actually based in Ghana. And they leverage technology to enable farmers to plan for veterinary care and veterinary services. And what they've been able to do is almost create an ecosystem around vet care, where they match vet doctors to livestock owners, where there are prompts, where there's a need. And this leveraging technology eases the cost of service, reduces the cost of service, but also increases the efficiency and effectiveness, which enhances the productivity of their livestock and obviously the profitability of their businesses. Another example is Twiga. And the interesting thing about Twiga is based in Kenya, is that when the founders of Twiga started this business, their dream was to export high-value fruits from Africa to the Middle East. And then they realized that, you know what, there's no standard for fruits. And it's very hard for us to meet global standards if we don't even have local standards. When I talk about standards, I mean, what is the shelf life? What is the size of the fruit? What is the color of the fruit? How consistent is it? And so this actually created a local value chain, where now, leveraging cell phones, they serve urban retailers who actually need fruit. And typically these retailers would wake up at 4 a.m., go to fruit markets, buy fruit, and then they would have it for their stalls in the city of Nairobi. And through Twiga, they basically can go on their cell phones and order fruit directly from farmers, and within 14 hours, that fruit is delivered. The fruit is fresh, it has a long shelf life, and Twiga has raised over $60 million and counting. From donors and funders, investors who are excited about what Twiga is doing, cutting out the middleman, improving the efficiency of the market, and ensuring that both farmers and retailers have access to more revenue and income. Another example that I love, that I profile in the book, is called Manila Pets. I don't know how many of you have heard of Manila Pets, but this was started by a very dynamic entrepreneur based in South Africa. And he actually also wanted to export meat from South Africa to the rest of the world. That was his vision. Everybody wants to diversify their revenue streams. Foreign exchange is always nice. But he realized that obviously Europe had standards that limited some of the South African meat from entering the European market. He then found out that people were willing to spend 3 times on their pets what they spend on themselves. And I don't know how many of you have pets, but it's a very interesting phenomenon. So he decided to start making pet food. And he currently exports to 12 countries in the world. He has a private label, he has a branded product, he exports, exotic pet food. And his demand has been exponential. The growth has been exponential. And he's such a great success story because it demonstrates how you can tweak your business model if it's demand driven. And with each entrepreneur, what we've realized is many of us come in with an idea of what we want to do. But as we test the market, we have to be ready to adjust our business plans and our business models to meet the needs of the market. Then another key piece of my research beyond the business model is the issue of talent. And I have to say this has been the biggest challenge I have had as an entrepreneur in scaling my businesses. Finding individuals who are mission-driven high achievers, who are passionate about the food and agriculture sector. In our continent, it's difficult to compete with the banking sector or with the oil and gas sector, at least in Nigeria, right? Many people don't see food and agriculture as very attractive. In fact, in Nigeria, it's the 5th choice option for most students. And we actually work in universities trying to change mindsets of students. They say, I want to study medicine. Okay, I can't get into medicine, so I'm going to try pharmacy. I can't get pharmacy, I'm going to try. And they come down to agriculture as the last option. They couldn't get any other entry into any other faculty, so they ended up in agriculture. And this is terrible because it means we're getting people who are not excited about the sector, not motivated. And we are starting to realize that we have to go back and change those mindsets by demonstrating what agriculture and food really is and the potential in this sector. And for entrepreneurs who are succeeding, who are scaling, they've had to also do this. They've had to invest in building a pipeline of talent. They've had to build their own capacity as leaders. They've constituted strong boards of directors so that they're not running a one-man or one-woman show. They have governance. They figure out how to retain talent. Where possible, they outsource so they don't carry the heavy load. They also structure their human resources for scaling. And many people don't realize how important human resources is to the success of a business. But in food and agriculture, it's so critical. And then they invest in building a culture of innovation and excellence. And I have many examples of organizations that have done this. 2 examples that I showcase in my book are New Cafe based in Uganda. And what was unique about New Cafe is that while they only have 53 full-time staff, they leverage their members and interns. They have interns coming from all over the world to help them. So they figure out a way to get talent without actually having them on their payroll. Another example is a very innovative company in Zambia called Good Nature Agro. And Good Nature Agro has basically built a private extension agent network where they actually have a school. They train these private extension agents, they incentivize them, they have a payment strategy to engage them, and compensation is determined entirely by the quantity and quality of seed produced by the farmers that these agents manage. So its incentives are aligned throughout the entire process. And this is a very innovative strategy that I think will be adopted by many entrepreneurs that work especially in the seeds, fertilizer, and irrigation landscape. Another key takeaway, as I talked about, is the importance of leveraging technology to scale. And during COVID-19, there was a funny cartoon, I'm sure many of you saw it, that said, who led the digital transformation of your company? Was it the CEO, the CTO, or COVID-19? Now, if you weren't using technology before, everybody, even farmers in Nigeria, recognize how important it is to use technology. I just got off 2 phone calls. I was actually in 2 meetings at the same time. Right before this call, most people didn't know I was in both meetings, and I was talking in both meetings, but that's what technology allows us to do. Don't worry, I'm only in this one at the moment. But the funny thing is that technology has transformed our lives. And in the food and agriculture sector, more than ever before in Africa, we recognize that this is the secret bullet to enable us to leapfrog. In financial inclusion, we're leveraging technology in advisory and information, market linkages, digital supply chain management. In macro agricultural intelligence, we're seeing innovative approaches to adoption of technology. We're also seeing technology with improvements in agricultural inputs, biofortified seeds, and we're using aeroponic technology. We're using, there's so many amazing innovations. The challenge, though, we're seeing with technology is who pays for the technology. Most farmers are not willing to pay for the technology. So is it a service provider who sees the benefit? Is it a banker who sees the benefit of the data? And across the value chain, entrepreneurs are having to come up with very creative approaches to sharing the cost of adoption and also changing mindsets and reducing the cost of data where cell phones are available. Digital technology is also quite rampant, and we're starting to see a lot more adoption of sensors and bioengineering and mobile applications and automated technology. When you look at just the cell phone subscription on the African continent, in 2018, there were 426 million unique mobile subscribers. And according to the GSMA, by 2025, we'll have 625 million mobile phone subscribers. What this will allow us to do is to gather data and to link farmers to markets, link farmers to inputs, and do things that we never could do before without the adoption of cell phones. And we're seeing this especially in East Africa. M-Pesa has allowed so much progress in East Africa because of the ability to leverage cell phones for mobile money, for loans, for insurance, and so many other benefits to farmers in that region. The fourth issue that I tackle, which comes out of the business model, is the importance of amplifying our brands and impact. And what I realized for many African entrepreneurs is we say, let our success speak for us. We're not used to having to build a brand and amplify our voice. And this affects our business. And what we've seen is that there are few organizations that are called funder darlings that everybody knows about because they've figured out how to build brands and sell themselves and tell their stories. And the onus is on us. And so I spent a lot of time in the book talking about the importance of even your company name, your branding, your tagline, your brand promise, your marketing strategy, your online presence, and your digital marketing strategy. And that we can't take it for granted that others have built such an important profile and we don't. And there are a few examples that inspire me that I profiled in the book. One is called Hello Tractor. And some of you might have heard of Hello Tractor. When I interviewed the entrepreneur who started Hello Tractor, I was blown away. He said to me, Ndidi, I actually wake up and listen to the podcast of every single CEO I want to partner with. I listen to their earnings reports. And what does Hello Tractor do? It has branded itself as the Uber of tractor. It provides software for tractor owners to enable them link with farmers who need tractor services. And he realized from working with farmers that he should actually, instead of targeting farmers, target the manufacturers of tractors. And he's been able to build such a powerful brand that from Africa, starting in Nigeria, he's now expanded to many countries, including South Asia, and has an active presence in India. And what he's done, which is so unique, is that he's, instead of paying for the advertising, his partners, his clients, the tractor companies, have been the ones advertising for him. He's been in Fast Company, and Forbes, and Washington Post, BBC, all because their communications teams have taken him along. And listening to his interpretation of what branding and marketing is about telling your story in such a compelling way that you're able to amplify your voice in partnership with others. Another example is Java Foods in Zambia. And some of you might have heard Monica speak. She's quite popular on the speaking circuit. So she started this company called Java Foods that makes instant noodles in Zambia, but also makes complementary food that's highly nutritious, super cereals. And she has built her brand, Easy, focused on transforming the way people leverage convenient foods. And she's done it in a very creative way, leveraging champions in Zambia, leveraging social media, appealing to young people, and the focus on her foods being quick, easy, and nutritious has been her tagline. And watching how Monica has been able to build Java Foods in such a short time gives us a lot of learnings for many entrepreneurs on the continent. A fifth piece, and this is what comes up often from entrepreneurs, is I need funding, I need funding, I need funding. And from my first book on social innovation and this book, the message is clear. There's a lot of money on the African continent. The challenge is, are our entrepreneurs investment ready? And what we keep on learning repeatedly is that many of our businesses are not investment ready. They're not ready to absorb capital because of their systems and structures, because of their credibility, because of their governance structures, because of their track record, and because they haven't been able to demonstrate a profitable exit for investors. And when we've looked at the spectrum of financing, there's so many opportunities across the spectrum, from venture capital to prizes, to private equity, to cross-subsidization, to crowdfunding, to earned income. And we're seeing more and more accelerators and incubators emerge on the continent. Across the continent, there are angel networks, there are incubators. Blue Moon in Ethiopia is a fantastic example, and I spent some time there when I was researching for this book, interacting with entrepreneurs. It's an incubator and accelerator. And there are learning labs, there are programs, and the challenge is, how can we ensure that more of these organizations don't just work with the donor darlings or the investor darlings that are out there in the public domain, but reach a bit deeper to get those that are harder to find and those who are not the usual suspects. And that's the challenge. Beyond financing, it's really important to shape the ecosystem. And for me, if anything, that COVID-19 has taught me in 2020 is that I, as an entrepreneur, have to shape the ecosystem. Ordinarily, most entrepreneurs say, I don't want anything to do with government. I want government out of my way. I want to run my business. But what we've realized is that you have to shape your ecosystem. When the lockdown started in Nigeria, I realized that the government hadn't put food as essential. And so imagine lockdowns without access to food, without farmers being able to get to their markets at the start of the planting season. And so we had to basically get involved in shaping policy to ensure that our farmers were considered essential workers and our food processors could continue to operate. And if we hadn't gotten involved in that, the crisis would have even been more pronounced. In fact, at the beginning of the crisis, I actually wrote an article saying, how can we ensure that hunger doesn't kill more people than COVID-19? And we had to avert that. So there are many domains to shaping policy. It's not just about the policy that affects your particular value chain, maybe rice or the import tariffs, the export tariffs, but also the financing environment, the cost of financing, the culture of an enabling environment and consistency, the support provided by government, the human capital, the markets. And when we map ecosystems, we always find enablers. Those are individuals or groups that are going to support your business. They're beneficiaries who definitely align with your business, and your success is their success. But every ecosystem has opponents and competitors. And the challenge for us as entrepreneurs is to figure out how to address these opponents and how to convert them to champions, and how to partner with competitors where we can, and how to create an enabling environment for all of us to thrive. And when we think about the ecosystem, it's so important to think about the regulatory environment, but also the geography and infrastructure, the associations. And what I keep on telling entrepreneurs is those who succeed are part of associations. They don't work in isolation. They're part of larger groups to amplify their voice and to increase their bargaining power. And working in isolation will not draw any impact. And the importance of also norms and cultures. And it's interesting, as you scale, most entrepreneurs focus on state or national governments, but in many parts of Africa, especially in agriculture, the village head or the traditional ruler or the religious leader has a lot of influence on the success of your business. And your impetus as an entrepreneur is to spend time understanding who has the power and how to navigate those power balances to effect positive change and to achieve the results that you so desire. An interesting case study of a company I visited in Rwanda just gives me a lot of hope. It's called Africa Improves Foods. Many of you might have heard of it. DSM is actually an investor in Africa Improved Foods, FMO, CDC, IFC. But they decided to come into Rwanda to basically create super cereals that the WFP and other humanitarian agencies would purchase. And they built this amazing factory that generates 7 tons an hour. And they realized from the onset that they had to partner with the Rwandan government. So the Rwandan government is an investor and a partner in Africa Improved Foods, and recognizes that this company is important for the region and important for Rwanda. And thinking through this ecosystem, and how they mapped it from the onset, it's so amazing because they were very creative as how they engaged not just the government, but funders and farmers and other stakeholders to ensure not only that they had efficient supply chain, enabling environment for their operations, but also a determined and confirmed market for their food products. And it's a very interesting model that I think a lot of us can learn from. And finally, I talk in the book about business resilience and building business resilience. There's a statistic that says that 43% of businesses never open after a disaster. And COVID-19 has been a shock for most businesses. And the challenge for entrepreneurs in the food and agriculture sectors, how do you survive shocks? COVID-19 is one shock, there are going to be many more shocks. And the reality is that entrepreneurs who continue to scale and succeed put in resilience into their DNA. They have scenario planning, they invest in building their resilience, they hedge their risks with how they manage finances, they build in buffers, they manage their costs, and they seek opportunities for support. And when we've seen companies that fail, we realize that many of them had no savings, hadn't hedged their risks, hadn't invested in insurance, and with one shock, they were out of business. And that's a challenge for many food and agriculture entrepreneurs on the continent, and something that I devote an entire chapter to. So as I round up, I wanted to just talk about some suggested way forwards, because obviously I can share with you about my research, and what my book is really a how-to guide for entrepreneurs who want to scale. But I feel a sense of urgency as an African entrepreneur, as an African who is committed to transforming this continent. The SOFI report from 2020 stated that 57% of households in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia cannot afford a healthy diet. That is a travesty. And as we think about the second wave of COVID-19, healthy diets are so critical for our resilience, for ability to survive illness, for ability to survive COVID-19. And so there's a sense of urgency, and it really matches a lot of the good work that Professor Joachim is doing with the Food Ecosystem Summit, the UN Food Summit. It's really around how do we ensure the availability and accessibility of nutritious food for our most vulnerable populations. And this is a critical need, and yet it seems so elusive. And how can we ensure the affordability of nutritious food? In Nigeria, 57% of household income is spent on food. This means that the household has very little money to spend on education, healthcare, housing, transport. And one of my goals is to reduce that rate to 30% by 2025. Now, India is 30%. I believe we can achieve it, but it takes so much work from all actors focused on the same things. COVID-19 has brought on new challenges to our food ecosystem and created more vulnerable households. And so these statistics from 2020 are even going to be worse as we look at this new year. And so the challenge is real. And one of the interventions that I started that was actually born out of my research for the book is called Nourishing Africa. And I'll end with just telling you a bit about Nourishing Africa. Nourishing Africa's mission is to drive the profitable and sustainable growth of African agriculture, food and agricultural landscape by attracting, empowering, and equipping, connecting and celebrating over 1 million dynamic, innovative, young agri-food entrepreneurs. And our vision is a flourishing, sustainable, and just food ecosystem, which leverages agtech and digital innovation driven by Africa's vibrant entrepreneurs to ensure that the continent nourishes itself and becomes a net exporter of food by 2050. And so Nourishing Africa is actually a live portal now. It's a digital hub It's considered a one-stop shop. It's a combination of Facebook, LinkedIn, and DevX for food and agriculture entrepreneurs. We have a hub, a membership portal, a knowledge platform, and all the great insights that I got from the research and from the book have fed into this home for African entrepreneurs. And from the members, they have a lot of support services. We started something called Ask an Expert, where you can actually ask experts questions to build your capacity. We have a networking session called First Thursdays. We have just launched an entrepreneur recovery program where we actually provide training and funding to entrepreneurs. But the most amazing thing is that entrepreneurs are meeting each other, they're sharing knowledge, they're accessing funding because we have a funding portal, they're finding staff. So we have a jobs portal, they're finding events, we have an events portal, and we're celebrating African food, the best of African food. So far, we have members in 32 countries. We just registered in June 2020, and we have over 1,000 members. Our dream is 1 million members. And we have members from Farm to Fork, which is really exciting. So as I round up, Nourishing Africa is just one intervention. There's so many other interventions required. And I'd really like to challenge all of you to think about your role in transforming the food and agriculture landscape in Africa. And to do this, I want you to consider the importance of building stronger partnerships. You know, it's really a divine intervention that I got to meet Professor Joachim through the Agra board and through the Game board. But the truth is that there's so much that we can be doing together across continents. And yet we don't see enough partnerships that are happening organically across ecosystems. And when we talk about the food ecosystem, it's not just about agriculture and farmers, but also folks involved in financing agriculture, health and nutrition, gender, climate change, manufacturing. And I think the importance of building partnerships is critical, and we have to be deliberate about building those partnerships. The second is the importance of the private sector. And I keep on reinforcing this because many times when I talk to researchers and professors and development partners, I realize that they're focused on farmers and they're focused on consumers. And they forget that farmers are entrepreneurs, but that also between the farmer and the consumer are all these SMEs. They're cooks, they're logistics providers, they're processors, they're equipment providers, who are SMEs who need to scale, who are critical to the success of our ecosystem. And it's important that we put them at the center of any design that we come up with. We also have to ensure the commercialization of research. And this has been a big frustration of mine because I work with a lot of research institutions that have great research, but the private sector is not aware of this research. And there's so many silos in our ecosystem. The importance of designing for adaptation and for adoption and scaling is critical. And I think Germany does such a fantastic job of this, and we have to replicate this on the African continent. The importance of investing in talent, and that's why I'm so excited that you are a university that invests in talent for agriculture and food. And I would love to see how we can partner with more African universities to ensure that there's knowledge transfer and that we're getting more young people excited about the sector. The importance of catalytic financing and patient capital that de-risks investment. And finally, the importance of platforms. And I'll recommend that you check out Nourishing Africa when you have some time. We want to build more partnerships with global institutions, with local institutions to ensure that we have knowledge for entrepreneurs, data for entrepreneurs, financing for entrepreneurs, and we enable them to scale. And finally, I end with my current quote. Every year I have a quote that motivates me. And this is a Tibetan quote. It says, if I tell you my dream, you might forget it. If I act on my dream, perhaps you'll remember it. But if I involve you, it becomes your dream too. I started with a picture of very hungry African children. And I want you to think of these faces when you think about Africa. These are children who are well-fed, well-nourished, they're happy, they're healthy, and they go on to live full and meaningful lives. This is my dream. And I'd like you to join me in achieving this dream. Let's support African entrepreneurs to scale and build vibrant ecosystems that ensure that we have nutritious food that's available and affordable. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ndidi. What an inspiring talk. I'm sure there are many in the audience who are ready to join your dream. Our dream is that research changes the world too. And co-dreaming is the name of the game. And I just want to highlight one thing from your talk. the complexity of scaling up. It is a research issue, in my opinion. The case studies are so telling, which you showed us. I happen to know some of them, but these models of success need to be understood, and they need a framework, and you have offered that. Another issue which you clearly pointed out is the creation of talent. Development is an issue of people and of cooperation. I don't want to spend time. You have a quality audience, by the way, involved in research on food industries worldwide and in Africa. You have postdoctoral researchers and senior researchers and doctoral students, a number of them from Africa here in this talk. And I look forward to their questions and comments. Colleagues, you can raise blue hand or you can simply wave and show your face. I see first hands coming up. Alicia Mirzabayev. Alicia, folks, when you start talking, briefly introduce yourself to Ndidi, who you are. Alicia, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Nwuneli, for this very inspiring presentation. I'm Alicia Mirzabayev. I'm agricultural economist at Center for Development Research at ZEF. Many of the business models and innovations that you discussed are about cutting transaction costs, are about creating new markets, overcoming market failures. What I think that their successful scaling up would eventually lead to two things. First, land consolidation, and perhaps also contract farming. Both of these dimensions would require very strong government regulation. There are political aspects. Where do you see the government's role in all this, facilitating the innovation process? Where do you think currently the governments are standing in this? Thank you.
Ndidi, take it right away.
Excellent question. Thank you so much. I agree with you. And that's why I spent quite a bit of time talking about the role of the government and the importance of shaping your policy environment. In fact, if I'm going to write another book, it's a book on shaping the ecosystem. I've spent the last 6 months as the coordinator for agriculture, food security, and rural development for the Nigerian government's visioning program for Vision 2050, 2025, 2030. And I've realized how complex our governments are and how disconnected many actors in the government are from the realities on the ground. And from what I've learned from this last 6 months, the importance of research and data-driven policy making is critical. The importance of an enabling environment is critical, and the importance of strong accountability frameworks. And like you said, we're going to have to shift the ecosystem. I believe that in Africa, right now, obviously, we have 60% of our population in agriculture. And in some countries like Nigeria, 90% of them are smallholder farmers. We're going to have to change that dimension. We're going to continue to have a few smallholder farmers, but we're going to need medium-sized farmers. We're going to need contract, outgrower schemes, and commercial farmers. And to plan for that future, we need that strong government intervention and government oversight. An enabling environment as well. And so you're spot on, and there are a few steps to do that, and at the basis is data-driven policymaking. Otherwise, we see patronage, a lot of opaque policies, contradictory policies, and corruption. And this has repeatedly set us back. So I'm currently working on that, and I'll be happy to engage offline with you because I'm sure you have great ideas for how we can move the needle on the policy environment. But every entrepreneur has to engage in shaping their policy environment.
Thank you. Next is Carlos. Carlos Siri.
Hello, I'm Carlos Siri, former ILRI DG and presently a senior fellow with CEF. I really also enjoyed the presentation very much. I wanted to ask you about your view in terms of the importance of the informal sector. The fact is that largely the food sector in Africa is informal, And this step from the informal to formal has been a big hurdle, a lot of policy constraints. Do you see any particular interventions in your vision about how to get more engagement and help the informal sector move on into this more formal entrepreneurial world? Over.
Ndidi?
Thank you very much. Yeah, another great question. And one of the things we're doing through the TWG and through the shaping policy in Nigeria is actually creating incentives for companies to move from the informal to the formal. And one of them that the Nigerian government has just introduced is basically a moratorium period of 5 years where you're not taxed, because that's the major impediment. Entrepreneurs don't want to be taxed, especially when they believe they're not getting anything in return from the government. So that's a very simple incentive. It's no tax and then financing if you register and financial support. And through Nourishing Africa, what we're also doing is providing incentives to entrepreneurs to move from the informal to the formal sector by providing them with training and knowledge, and then these financial sweeteners. And we realize, though, that there's a limit to how far you can grow if you remain in the informal economy. There's a limit to the deals that you can be exposed to. Doesn't matter where you're in the value chain. And so it's in the best interest of the entrepreneurs to move. And so we're working with the government and other stakeholders to create an enabling environment. But you're right, it's a huge challenge, but there are changes and there are some promising trends in the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Great. Ndidi, let me interject a question on agricultural development cooperation. There is quite a bit of investment from the so-called donor countries in African agriculture, food system, and so on. You gave some of their examples where they did play a role, such as the food company in Rwanda, which was triggered by WFP and a great initiative by our common friend Josette Chiran in those days. What's your vision on how should development cooperation and development investment by the multilateral banks and the African Development Bank, a former executive director is on this call. Give us your open assessment, what future. Germany by itself spends about $1.5 billion per annum in the field of agriculture development assistance.
Thank you very much. This is a question that's near and dear to my heart. And because I run a consulting firm, I work with a lot of development partners. And I've seen how to do it well and how to do it badly. And I think sometimes there are quite a few distortions. So I'll say a few things. First, I think development partners, international development organizations that come into Africa have to recognize that on the continent, we also have ideas and approaches. So it has to be a co-design process. I am very reluctant to partner with organizations that come in with what they think is the answer. After a few study trips, 5-day trips to Nigeria, and you've come up with the silver bullet for how something should be structured, that will not work. It has to be a co-design process with people on the ground. The second is that it has to be a process that inspires and empowers local players. And I'll pick on the US because I happen to have a US passport. My mother is American, so that's a safe haven. Is that USAID struggled over many, many years because with their funding, they would actually give the grants or the projects to a DC-based organization like Chemonix, MSI, DAI, you know them. They're called Beltway Bandits. And then they would channel the resources and there'd be no local player on the ground. After the 5-year project, there'll be no evidence that this project ever existed. And we used to push back, and when Raj Shah became the administrator of the USAID, this is one of the things he pushed, was the importance of local organizations. Channel interventions through local organizations. You're building their capacity, you're empowering them, and you ensure that after the money, the funding is over, that project is sustained. And that leads me to the third thing, which is there has to be private sector buy-in. Right now, we're implementing the Nigerian Dairy Development Project, the Advancing Local Dairy Development in Nigeria project I told you about. And in that project, which is funded by the Gates Foundation, our private sector partners have to match. They are matching the resources. And so it's demand-driven because they have to put in money and they have to believe in it. They're sourcing locally. And that has changed the dynamic of that intervention because it is going to be sustainable. There's also a National Advisory Council for that project so that there's local ownership and sustainability beyond the life of the project. And that design is so critical. And then the last thing I'll talk about is M&E. You know, in my book, I talk about M&E. And I think we're tired of a few good stories. I know I shared case studies just to bring my session to life, but we really need baselines from the beginning, and we need M&E throughout the life of the project, and we need a budget for advocacy. And in this Aldine project, there's a budget for advocacy, there's a budget for M&E, because you have to learn from your mistakes, and you have to be able to assess something without any emotion to say, is it making a difference? Is it improving the lives of people? And should we change something that we're doing? And can we learn and publish our findings so that other people can build on them? And can we shape policy at the same time? And I think that is the secret to success. Some development partners are farther along than others. I would say that I'm very impressed with how the Dutch is currently investing in Africa. They actually believe in the partnership model and have been investing in local organizations. And they're probably one of the most progressive organizations. We are doing a bit of work with GIZ now, and I'm starting to see some changes in the way that Germany is engaging in Africa, but I hope to see more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there she becomes diplomatic for the first time. Janetta, I see you raise your hand. Please go ahead. Don't just phrase a question or a comment. Say a few words about the food industry surveys, which you are doing in 4 African countries. And maybe that triggers some comment from Ndidi. Janetta?
Thank you, Professor. So my name is Janetta Kubik, and I'm a senior researcher at ZEF, and more specifically, I'm working for the PARI project, where, as Professor mentioned, we've been working quite a lot on agribusinesses and especially post-farm sectors of the whole agribusiness. So recently, together with Heike, we have conducted a survey, COVID-related survey, first of all, in 4 countries. So in Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria as well, and then South Africa. So we were able at least to get a first-hand overview of how firms in the food industry reacted to the COVID-19. So far, we only had analyzed the very early data, so immediately after the COVID started in those countries and after the first regulations were set. And actually, I think the general result or the general finding was that, first of all, as you mentioned, food sector is definitely an essential sector. So probably it was not that much affected. And also firms seemed to be very much resilient. Even though I think in case of Nigeria, there was the biggest share of firms who had to temporarily close, and who, as you also mentioned, which experienced a lot of price increases in terms of inputs and raw materials, and also who experienced a lot of problems with importing inputs from abroad. So that's with respect to our COVID study. Probably this is a lot in line with what you were saying. I really liked what you said about how COVID can be this disruptive event that can lead to leapfrogging via adopting digitalization. But what I wanted to talk about or to ask your opinion about is, first of all, a lot of examples that you showed in this presentation and which were actually very inspiring. But these are the good stories or the success stories. But probably there are many more failure stories behind those success stories. And I think also our research fails to account for these failure stories because such firms simply exit the data and they are not observable anymore. Were you able to get some insights from failure stories as well, and what leads to biggest failures in agro-industry?
Ndidi, wait for a moment. I would like to call on one more. Time is then running out. I'm afraid you go into your next two meetings simultaneously in a moment. Ami Fire, please, Ami.
Hi, good morning, Ndidi. My name is Ami Fai, and I am also a researcher at ZEF. I am really happy to hear this presentation because this is a very interesting topic, and I am looking forward to reading the book. Well, my question goes mainly to the educational background of those entrepreneurs, because I do imagine that to even think of the strategies that you mentioned here, people might need to have some level of education. And in Africa, for instance, in the informal sector, many people do not have, some high level of education. So I wonder whether you have also explored the educational background of those researchers as, success factors.
Ndidi, wait for a moment. Oliver, very quickly, briefly.
Yeah, thank you. I think in addition, thank you for a very good presentation and really very inspiring. In addition to what Ami has just asked about the educational aspect, I wanted to ask about the intrinsic. Do you have any section on your book where you're talking about perhaps this very personal character of different individuals that perhaps make them better business entrepreneurs or really going to business? And so I'm talking about the non-educational kind of skills.
Yeah, great question. Question is, how can the Ndidis be scaled? Ndidi.
Thank you.
You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for your excellent questions and kind words. The issue of failures is a very good question, and I didn't focus on the failures, but I have been working for 25 years in this industry, in the development space. So I actually know about some of the failures and personally have experienced some failures. So I would say that the biggest failure is the business model. And that's why I spend a lot of time in my chapter talking about business models and actually talk about how those who succeeded had to change their business models. If they had stuck with their business models, they would have failed. When we started Ace Foods, our first products were going to be jams and pepper sauces. And we realized that it wasn't demand driven. So we had to pivot quickly. So I spent a bit of time talking about what it takes to pivot and what it takes to have agility, which is so important. In terms of educational backgrounds, definitely the people I interviewed are educated. At least they have a university education, a first degree. But I would tell you that the principles are not limited to those things. And that comes to the second question around qualities. The passion, the vision. The passion and vision are critical because it's such a tough ecosystem that if you're not passionate and you don't have a vision for success, you'll give up. And I talk a lot about the attributes of those who have succeeded and what you need. And some of those skills that you need to build to be able to stay and succeed and scale. And so I spend a lot of time talking about that because I believe the leader and the board that they constitute are so important to their future. So I'm sure I haven't done justice to your excellent questions, but this has been fantastic. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity.
Indeed, this is a first, and there should be more. If there would not be COVID-19, we would have loved to welcome you in person, not just for a brief visit, but for an extended stay at ZEF. We hope that can be arranged in the not too distant future. I want to look for opportunities that our researchers can partner with you and your organizations, learning from the insights, the practicalities of scaling, doing implementation research around good business case studies and failures, and so learn together and exchange ideas and experiences. Thank you again. It was great to have you. And as soon as possible, come and visit us in Bonn. And you have only gotten a glimpse of the wonderful network which we have in CEF and around. There's more. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. God bless you all. And thanks for the wonderful opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye.